Een hele goede avond. Welkom allemaal bij onze webinar. Ik zal me even voorstellen, want niet iedereen die aanwezig is kent mij nog. Ik ben de nieuwe voorlichter van het CIDI. Mijn naam is Aline Pennewaard. Ik ben per 1 januari begonnen en ik heb het tot nu toe heel erg naar mijn zin. En dit is de eerste keer dat ik dit doe, dus nou ja, fingers crossed dat het allemaal goed gaat, maar daar gaan we wel van uit. Ontzettend leuk dat jullie gekomen zijn. Vanavond gaat Zvika Klein voor ons het een en ander vertellen over de recente gebeurtenissen in Israël en wat we mogen verwachten voor de toekomst. Zvika is journalist bij de Jerusalem Post, een van de grootste kranten van Israël. En hij heeft voor de president gewerkt in het kader van diasporazaken. Hij schrijft ook voor de Jerusalem Post over diasporazaken. Dit is echt zijn specialiteit. En hij komt ons het een en ander vertellen over het heden en de toekomst. En wat we allemaal kunnen verwachten de komende tijd. En tussendoor zullen jullie ook de gelegenheid hebben om vragen te stellen. Er zit een heel mooi VNA-icoontje daaronder waar je op kunt drukken. En waarin je je vraag dan in kunt typen. Daar krijg ik er een melding van. En zodra ik de gelegenheid heb, ga ik natuurlijk proberen om die vraag er even tussendoor te stellen. Nou, ik hoop dat jullie allemaal een leerzame avond hebben.
Hello.
Hi Zvika, welkom.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining us. I just introduced you and I introduced myself to our viewers. So you can tell a little bit more about yourself and explain everything we want to know about what's going on in Israel.
Yeah, okay. So nice to meet you and to see you and to speak to people in Holland who care for Israel and are in touch with Israel and follow what's going on over here. And we're not an easy country to follow what's going on. It may be easier at times to follow a Scandinavian country with the politics. So a little bit about myself. My name is Zvika. I was born in Chicago, grew up in Israel, so I sound American, but I'm actually pretty Israeli, I would hope. And I write for the Jerusalem Post in the past year. But before that, I was writing for Israeli Hebrew-speaking newspapers for more than 10 years, Makol Rishon and Ma'ariv newspaper. And I have 3 kids, twin boys and a younger girl who's 3.5. And it's lots of fun. And that's pretty much it, I think. So, yeah, so I mean, basically, we're here today. And I don't know if you could see the screen that I'm sharing. Let me just see. Wait, just see. Can you see it now?
I can see it, yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is like a caricature of, and it kind of like resembles what is going on in Israel in the past few months. And before I start, maybe I'll also just say, I'll be more than happy. There'll be questions at the end, but also if you wanted to ask a specific question about something that I say, please feel free to write the question in the Zoom app, and Aline will tell me, will make me answer your questions. So happy to do that. So as you see over here, it's a caricature that some would say is anti-Semitic, and others would say resembles maybe what's going on in Israel. So you have Prime Minister Netanyahu in the middle, and he's got his hands, and he's like with the dolls pulling around, and it's basically all these different reforms that the government is trying to promote. This government is just a little bit more than 2 months old, and even before it was established, there was so much of a mess, and everyone over here many people in the government are used to being opposition and making just a lot of noise and creating lots of controversy. So you have on the one end, there's this the minister of his name is Shlomo Kari. He's the minister of communications, and he wants to cancel the official broadcasting networks that are paid for by the government. On top of him, there's another guy, Boaz Bismuth, who up until recently was an editor-in-chief of an Israeli newspaper who wants to ban the ability to record someone without their consent. And then you have Simcha Rothman, and Yariv Levin, who is the justice minister, who are promoting the judicial reform, which is the largest, what you definitely hear about on the news, is the largest kind of issue in Israel in the past few months, is changing the courts, and we'll get into that in a second. And so really, there's lots of things going on, as always in Israel, but it seems like it's a little bit more than ever was before on many, many issues. So let me just continue there. So just a little short brief. The Knesset elections in 2022. So this is the results, where you have the Likud with the largest number. Likud is the right-wing party. It declares itself to be, a proud national party, but also a liberal party. It used to be more liberal than it is today, most people would say. And then there's the Yesh Atid party, who is the center party, headed by Yair Lapid. Likud is headed by Benjamin Netanyahu. And then you have pretty much the coalition that they created, which is two ultra-Orthodox parties, as we say, Haredi, which is the Shas and United Torah Judaism, and Religious Zionism, which was a block of three different parties, which was kind of the surprise, not really the surprise of the elections, but what made this government different than other governments, because it's a very large group of Knesset members who are very, very extreme towards the right. And therefore, they are actually very vocal and very powerful in this government. And then the other, parties are, the Benny Gantz, which was a center party, the State Camp, which used to be blue and white, Victor Lieberman, Israel Beitenu, which is mainly Russian-speaking Israelis. The Labor Party shrunk to 4, and then there's the two Arab parties, and Meretz, which was the extreme left party, didn't actually pass the threshold and get into the government. So this previous election, and there were many elections just in the past year or two, was very dramatic at that point, because it really emphasized how much the state of Israel is going towards the right. So the Religious Zionist bloc, as I mentioned,
Israel's elected government has been advanced.
Sorry about that. One sec. The Religious Zionist bloc, as I mentioned. So we have Bezalel Smotrich, who is the chairman of the party, but it's really, as I said, it's a party with 3 blocks in it. So he is now the finance minister. He's actually flying to the U.S. next week. There's lots of pressure for the U.S. not to actually let him in, mainly from the left, but even Jewish organizations, some of them, even mainstream Jewish organizations, are saying, don't let him in, or don't have dialogue with him, right? The more of the extreme left are saying, don't let him in. But Jewish organizations are either just not going to meet him, or, people may be sick that day and not come to this event that he's going to. Nobody from the American administration is actually going to meet him, which is, I think, a big deal, because he's the finance minister of Israel. So, there's different, explanations. One explanation is he was very vocally negative towards Tom Knights, who's the ambassador of the U.S. to Israel. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, his death didn't even actually reach out to anyone, to a counterpart in the American, the American side in the Treasury, in order to create some sort of a meeting. So it's very interesting. And then there's many ministers from his party in the government. And then there's Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's considered to be more to the right, even more extreme to the right, from Bezalel Smotrich, who is the first time he's actually become a minister. He's the bad boy of Israeli politics, and even Israeli. He was, for years, he was kind of, demonstrating, creating these very creative techniques of kind of proving his point. He, was actually, detained many times by the police, and many legal prosecutions against him for certain things that he did. Very anti-Arab, and this party in general, also Avi Maoz was in the middle, very anti-LGBT, not to the sense that it should be banned from the public, but definitely not promoting it in educational systems or discussing it, etc. So it's kind of created, and I would say many of the people in this party are also pretty junior politicians. So every other day they're saying something that's very controversial and making headlines all over the world. And many of them never really had a situation where actually they had to respond to the international media. And it's something that's very new to them. Sorry about that.
Israel's elected government has been in.
There you go. Okay, so I have a very short video about the judicial reform. And this video was created by Kohelet. Kohelet is the, every time when you read something in the newspaper, you need to know who's behind it and who's trying to promote it in order for you to understand where it fits in the puzzle. So Kohelet is really this Israeli think tank funded by money from the US, from Republican billionaires in the US, promoting right-wing libertarian type of economy in Israel, and promoting right-wing and conservative ideas in Israel. So Kohelet is a very influential think tank. Many times in the past few years, the heads of the think tank, or even just the think tank itself, was like listed on the most influential Israelis, because most of the reforms, or many of the reforms we're hearing about, and we'll get to some of them later, were born actually in this institute, which is not only a think tank. Many of these think tanks there, they call themselves a do tank, right? They're actually promoting it and also trying to implement it. So it's an interesting organization. So again, this is a video from the people promoting the judicial reform.
Advancing certain reforms. The main goal of the reforms is to restore checks and balances between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. These reforms were among its main election promises and enjoy solid public support. Over the last 2 decades, the judicial branch has annexed powers in a way that cannot be found in any other democracy in the world. For example, sitting Supreme Court justices have an effective veto over the appointment of new justices. The court can use vague claims of unreasonableness to overturn any government policy or to disqualify inconvenient civil service appointments that are out of its jurisdiction. The court declared Israel's basic laws to be its constitution and uses them to annul ordinary statutes. But now it has taken to itself the authority to rule parts of this very constitution unconstitutional. The court decided, with no basis in law, that any ruling of the Attorney General is binding on the government. That means that an appointed civil servant is now the boss of the elected Prime Minister. Could you imagine any of these things happening in the United States or any other democratic country? Some of the court's rulings have done severe long-term social and economic harm. For example, the court suspended signed government contracts for offshore natural gas drilling, undermining its ability to do business. The court overruled hard-won compromises regarding Haredi army enlistment that sent Israel into an endless series of elections. Prominent Israeli former Supreme Court judges have strongly criticized the current judiciary's abuse of power, and so have eminent judicial scholars from around the world. Professor Richard Posner called Israeli Chief Justice Aaron Barak.
Oh, sorry. Oh, wait, we cut that off by mistake. I am so sorry.
Israel's elected government has.
Okay, wait. Let me just get that there. Here we are.
And so have eminent judicial scholars from around the world.
Aline, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I have a question in the meantime.
Professor Richard Posner called Israeli Chief Justice Aaron Barak an enlightened despot and a legal pirate. The reforms in progress will address the anomalies of the Israeli system and bring Israel just a few steps closer to the rest of the Western democracies.
Right. So that's a very positive, way of looking at it. And, again, that's what the people who are trying to amend the laws regarding the judicial reform. But obviously, there's a very big controversy, and you cannot say that it's necessarily reflecting everyone, but it does reflect a very big chunk of Israelis who feel they need a change. And we'll get into that in a second.
Yeah, and I have a question from one of our viewers regarding the left-right difference that you just explained to us before this video. And he wants to know, are they conservative, laissez-faire, antisocial, extreme religious as well? He wants like more of a clean definition of left and right.
Right, so obviously, like everything in Israel, it's complicated, but I would say, so when I say right wing, sometimes I'm just translating in my head from Hebrew. It would be conservative in a way, right? And conservatives and liberals, but it's not that decisive because you have conservatives who are, I would say a large percentage of the conservatives are religious, but not all of them are, strictly religious. Many of them are traditional. A very big population in Israel is traditional Israelis that are, I would say they would be going to an Orthodox synagogue when they go, but they'll also, not necessarily keep kosher in 100%, or so it's complex. And then the liberals, I would say a large majority are secular. Some of them I would say are socialists, but interestingly, these the very idealistic parties like the Labor shrunk. And Meretz, which was extreme to the left, didn't make it into the Knesset. So a very big percentage of people who were voting for these, let's say socialist parties are voting for Yair Lapid or for Benny Gantz that are center left, center right, depending on the topic. But that's kind of like the future at the moment of the left in Israel. So I hope I answered the question.
Yeah. It was a very clear answer.
Okay. So the judicial reform, and I'll make it quick and try and make it very, easy because it's very difficult to understand. But basically, there's 4 major issues in this judicial reform, and I mean, as you saw there, it's really kind of changes that they wanted to make. So the first one being the override clause, and that's probably maybe the most controversial, is basically at the moment the Supreme Court has an ability to take a law that was voted on in the Knesset, and if someone who appeals and feels that this is something that abuses human rights or the rights of individuals, then they could actually override that law. But what they wanted to institute is, okay, they override our law, but if we have 61 votes out of 120 in the Knesset, we can override them. So that's one of them. The other one is a test of responsibility, basically meaning that the Supreme Court actually won't be able to judge the legislation appointments, the legislation or the appointments of other government decisions. So, and base it on reasonability, as opposed to what I said, human rights, which was what really kind of the base of the legal system was. Appointing judges is basically the system up until a few years ago was very kind of closed, and it was mainly like the senior judges voted on who would be a judge with them in the Supreme Court. A few years ago, it was changed, and now there's actually representatives from the political system and from other systems in Israel. What they want to do is have more of a substance for the political side in the determining of who will be judges. And one of the, they'll give an example, for instance, that in the U.S. you have a president who votes for, who offers who will be a justice in the chief in the Supreme Court. There are certain states in the U.S. that actually people vote for who will be the judge in their court. So that's kind of like the way they're going to. And the final one was the legal advisors. Every government ministry or every official body has a legal advisor, internal legal advisor that's a government representative of the justice ministry. And what they want to do is, instead of having this person be there for 7 years, I think, of a term, and don't forget, in Israel, we have unfortunately very short governments. So there, in 7 years, we could have, I don't know, like 5 governments, unfortunately. So they want it to be something that the minister himself will determine. So the minister himself would say, I want this guy, Fred, who is a genius in international law, to be the legal advisor of this ministry. And when I am replaced by a different minister, he will decide who the legal advisor would be. Today, it's something that they cannot touch. And these legal advisors have become very powerful in deciding certain things can be or can't be. And that's something that they wanted to change. And I'll just give you a little kind of anecdote. Aharon Barak, who was the Chief Justice, I think 2 rounds ago, or maybe, I think it was like 2 rounds ago, pretty much did a very big reform in the judicial system. And he promoted a type of judicial system that was a lot more feisty than it was before. And he's become like the demon. He's been demonized by the right for kind of taking over the judicial system, etc. And there was an interview with him a week or 2 ago on Channel 11, which is the official Israeli broadcasting TV that the communications minister wants to close down. And it was a fascinating, interesting interview. And what was interesting is pretty much what the people who are promoting this amendment are saying. There's only one Sephardic Jew, Sephardic Israeli, who is a Chief Justice. And the rest of them are Ashkenazic, and of course there are also Arab, Muslim, etc. But they said, how can it be that this is the largest group of most Israeli Jews are Sephardic, meaning they come from either, like a Spanish, Portuguese background, mainly from North African or Middle Eastern countries, as opposed to Ashkenazic, which are from Europe, Western European, Eastern European. And they feel, it's kind of this, they feel that they are not represented. And it's amazing how, tens of years after, big demonstrations that happened within Israeli society regarding Sephardic, Ashkenazic, who immigrated here before and who's running the country and who's trying to silence the others. It's actually continuing this rift between different groups in Israeli society. And in a way, most of the people who are Ashkenazic were more secular. And again, this is very broad and very, broad perspective. And many people who are on, the Sephardic are more traditional, as we said, or religious. So it's become a very big rift. And in this interview, Aharon Barak, who was the Chief Justice, was asked, so why is there only one guy who's actually from Moroccan descent in the Supreme Court? And he said, well, we couldn't find any good ones who were with Sephardic background. And that's something like you don't say in an interview, and it created huge controversy and huge, and very big debates about how the body of the Supreme Court should be run and how judges are elected. Let me just continue there.
Israel.
What's going on with my presentation? Oh, here we go. Okay. Another issue is the law of return. The law of return, for those of you who don't know, is basically one of the main fundamental, laws in Israel. Mainly, saying if you're Jewish, or if you have at least one Jewish grandparent, you are able to become a citizen of Israel, which is an amazing thing, because pretty much after the Holocaust, where Jews had nowhere to go, the idea was if you have any Jewish connection, you can be an Israeli citizen. So the law of return was officially passed in 1950, but in 1970 it was amended and extended to the grandfather, as I mentioned, grandfather or grandmother clause. Before that, it was just people who were considered Jewish. Now, in 1970, if you had no Jewish connection, you had no reason to move to Israel, because Israel was this country in the desert, surrounded by its enemies. It was not the startup nation. It was like the Jaffa nation with these oranges, which are amazing. But do you move to a country for its oranges? I don't know. So fast forward in 2023, 2022, Israel is a country that many people, definitely from countries that are not as strong financially, want to move to. For instance, if you're from Russia, living under Putin's, regime, and you're afraid that one day you won't be able to go out, so you want an Israeli passport, and that's why many Russian and Ukrainian Jews and descendants of Jews in the past few years have made Aliyah or received a passport. And actually today, we just reported, interestingly, that the government is going to change the law and only allow the passport after living here for a year, because many people were trying to abuse or use this loophole and get an Israeli passport, and actually an envelope with money that is actually intended for a new immigrant, and just went back home with their passport. And an Israeli passport is worth a lot if you're from Russia. Ukrainians is a different story, because you could be a refugee and get an amazing, financial basket and rights of many European countries, and even outside of Europe. You could get, you could be considered as a refugee, but not a lot of people want Russian, immigrants at the moment in the Western world. So that's a big deal for if you're from Russia. So, and as I mentioned, so 64% of people who 64% of Israelis, of Jewish Israelis, support the amendment of the grandchild clause, according to a survey that was done recently. So that's a big deal. That's a very big percentage. This also created lots of controversy, mainly outside of Israel, because it's a very complicated situation. The idea also of broadening the law of return is because Jews in the former Soviet Union were forced to give up Judaism. And keeping their Judaism would actually danger their lives. And in a situation like that, even according to Judaism, you do whatever you can to survive. So many people feel it's not okay to just say, oh, we're cutting off at a certain point here, when these people, it's not their fault that they actually had to give up their Judaism. And this was like the big deal before the judicial reform was promoted. It kind of silenced and became quiet again. It's a very big question if it's actually gonna move forward, because there was a lot of pressure from international leaders and also internal leaders in Israel regarding the amendment. The current Minister of Aliyah, of Immigration and Integration, Ophir Sofer, said, he told me, pretty much saying, it's not on the table at the moment. There will be some sort of amendment, but it may not be for the law itself, but actually, making sure that that the law is being, respected the way he sees it, and pretty much making sure that people actually have this connection. Because in a way today, there are certain ways to kind of loophole through this law. And if you have a fourth generation relative who is Jewish, you could actually make Aliyah. So they want to kind of change that, or even make it in a way like many countries have a certain period of time that's like, you're temporary until you're actually officially accepted, maybe a test of knowledge or of the language, the culture, the history. So that's like kind of different directions they're going into. It kind of calmed down because of the judicial reform, which is the biggest story in Israel and outside of Israel. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
And I also have a question regarding the changes they want to make in the law of return, regarding the grandchild clause. There was also the clause that non-Jewish partners married to Jews can come. Are they planning on changing that, or is it only regarding to the one Jewish grandparent kind of thing?
I don't think they were changing that, because that's also that's more an issue of like human rights, not human rights, of like of
family reunification.
Yeah, right. So I mean, it's an international issue of kind of reuniting with your relatives. For instance, in Ethiopia, many people who make Aliyah today are actually making Aliyah not according to the law of return, but actually because they have a first-degree relative in Israel. So I don't see that being changed. But again, there's lots of noise around it, but I haven't heard anything about canceling this part of the law of return.
Okay, and I have another question from a viewer. In this case, what about people who can't prove that they're Jewish because the papers of their family were destroyed in the Holocaust? What do they want to do in these kind of situations?
Right, so that's a very specific question. So I mean, basically, depending where you're coming from, because if you're coming from the former Soviet Union, there's an organization called Nativ, which is part of the Prime Minister's office, and their specialty is kind of going through these documents and understanding, according to the person's last name, according to where they lived, according to the archives, etc., who would be from a Jewish family and who wouldn't be. There are also private organizations who assist people to get these documents. So that's nothing that would change, and it's definitely kind of a complicated issue, but also depends how many generations we're going back, right? If it's 4 generations, if you're very young, and it's 4 generations back, then it's already a little problematic. But also, there's also the issue of conversion, and the state of Israel, also had to abide to the Supreme Court decision, accepts conversions of people from Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform Jews from around the world. I mean, once it used to just be Orthodox, but you can convert with a Reform rabbi outside of Israel and make Aliyah as an Israeli citizen. So, okay. Sorry about that. Here we go.
ברק מצווה, או בתרגום חופשי נביחת מצווה, וכן, זה מה שאתם חושבים.
בבג"ץ זה יהודי, וגם זה יהודי, והוא, ברור, סבתא שלו הייתה רב, בטח שהוא יהודי, וגם זה, וגם זה, וגם זה, וגם זה. רק יהדות התורה תשמור על היהדות שלך, של הילדים שלך, ושל הנכדים שלך.
I'm on the track, don't worry.
Bark mitzvah.
Bark mitzvah. So basically the fact that there are, basically all the parties in this coalition, except for the Likud, are Orthodox, Jewish Orthodox parties, right? Whether they ultra-Orthodox, they're more to the right, religiously, or more modern Orthodox, religious Zionist. There's many of these people in these parties are very anti-liberal Judaism outside of Israel, and kind of saying, they're trying to infiltrate Israel and influence Israel. So there have been many statements that have been very negative towards Reform and conservative Jews. There was a very fast news cycle just like a week or two ago where the Shas party, which is the Sephardic ultra-Orthodox party, who wanted to have a vote in the government about a new law, an amendment to a law, stating that if you go to the Kotel, to the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall, and you are not dressed modestly, men or women, but obviously women, you can be fined 10,000 shekels. So that would be like what in euro, like 2,000? No, how much would it be? Like 3,000 euro or 2,000 euro, and potentially go to jail for up to 6 months. Now, this is a crazy law. Like, even religious people, when they heard it, they're like, what? And it's amazing because until it started, like the news cycle started in the morning and everyone was going crazy. And by the time like the Americans woke up at like 7 a.m., 8 a.m. US, Eastern Coast time. So it's like 2 and 3 o'clock in Israel. It was already Prime Minister Netanyahu said, I don't know what they're talking about. This is not happening. He has to do that a lot lately, making these statements. But even the religious parties were like, what? Like what? A half a year in jail because someone dresses immodestly at the Kotel. That's
crazy. Yeah.
That's crazy. So, these things are just like popping up and out. And it definitely, even though, okay, this law did not pass, it influences the way Israelis see the government, but also people outside of Israel see this government. Another interesting situation is that there are so many ministers in this government, I think more than 30, that they had to kind of invent government ministries or take different ministries apart in order to give one of these politicians a ministry. So on the right, we have Amichai Sikli, who is a Likud member. These are all Likud members, who is the Diaspora Affairs and Combating Anti-Semitism Minister, which also, deals with BDS, which is something that they didn't deal with before. Eli Cohen, who's the official foreign minister, but doesn't really have a lot of responsibilities because he's just a minister for a year and is supposed to be replaced after a year. But because Ron Dermer, who is Netanyahu's right-hand man, is in charge of a ministry called the Strategic Affairs Ministry that used to exist, but now has a different purpose. And the three topics of this purpose are Iran, connections with the U.S., and promoting the Abraham Accords. These are three of the most important issues in Israel's foreign policy. So the foreign minister is not involved in it. And Ron Dermer, who is the strategic affairs minister, is considered to be the non-official foreign minister, but he's the one going to the White House and meeting with the administration, not Eli Cohen, who's actually the foreign minister. And then there was someone else who was very offended that she didn't get any ministry. So Galit Distal, who is a Knesset member from the Likud, very vocal, very kind of one of those people that creates a lot of noise. She is now the Hasbara minister. So like the I forgot the word. She's the minister of kind of advocacy, but I don't think she yet received any responsibilities. Now, you would think that if you have foreign ministers that are semi-foreign ministers, they would be able to explain the judicial reform and other reforms, but they haven't. So who is actually the real foreign minister is a very big question. Now, kind of a very strong contrast, Israel's been going through very difficult times just, since the beginning of the year. There were just in January alone, we're talking about 251 terror attacks that came out of the West Bank or Jerusalem. 14 Israelis who were killed just in 2023 and 22 injured. So it's definitely an upscale in a situation. And you could see screenshots from different of the terrorist attacks. For instance, 7 who were killed and 3 injured in the Jerusalem synagogue in a neighborhood called Neve Yaakov in Jerusalem, kind of like the northern part of Jerusalem, on a Saturday. And you have the Jerusalem attack where at the bus stop, and there was a brother who was killed, and his brother who was critically injured dies after a day after him. Just recently, I think last week, there was 2 brothers, another pair of brothers in the West Bank who were just driving home two of these young men, who one of them, just finished the army, and the other one was supposed to be going into the army, who were killed at I think a meter and a half away while they were driving in the car. Someone actually stopped them and shot at them and killed them. I think just yesterday, I think they actually, in an operation, they actually captured the terrorist and killed him. So it's a very kind of dramatic time here from all fronts. And another front we have is, why is this not working? We'll work in a second. Another front that we have is really the demonstrations. Every Saturday night, there are huge demonstrations that could get to more than 100,000 Israelis, whether it's in Tel Aviv or around the country, who are demonstrating in a very kind of successful way, I would say, and bringing more and more people onto this. Every day we'll see another letter in the media from different Israelis who are saying there's a problem with this judicial reform. Many people feel that Israel is not going to be a democracy after this happens. I didn't say it before, but the people who are promoting the judicial reform, in a way, have support of a big chunk of Israelis, but the way they've been promoting it has been perceived to be very violent and very kind of in your face, that creates a lot of antagonism, even from people on the conservative side who voted for right-wing parties, are they feel that there's so much hate going on now, and it's a very difficult time. I was just when I wash dishes in the evening, so I listened to the news, and there was a news anchor who she spoke very nicely, and she said, everyone's trying to create hate and say this person said that, this person said that. I'm just trying to make people talk, because this person won't speak to that person. Yair Lapid, who is promoting the demonstrations against the reform, won't meet with, well, it can't be Netanyahu, because Netanyahu has a trial against him. He's not allowed to interfere in the judicial reform. But with the people who are promoting the reform, and the people promoting the reform said, we'll meet with Lapid, but only after we vote on the first round. You need 3 rounds in the Knesset to vote for it. So it was a whole big mess and they basically haven't met each other. And President Herzog, who doesn't really have, the president in Israel doesn't have a lot of responsibility, but he is considered to be a very leader that's very accepted on all sides of Israeli society and all religions and all faiths, who had a very dramatic speech a few weeks ago and said, here's what I offer for a compromise, and I invite you all to come to the president's residence and have a discussion there, which is not exactly something that he should be doing, but it was, some see it as him being very brave. Others feel that he's not doing enough. If you're very against the reform, you say, wait, this is a guy who was the chairman of the labor. Why isn't he saying it's shit? Why isn't he saying it's something that is going to be turning Israel into not a democratic state? And people on the right are saying, oh, he's a lefty. Why should we listen to him? But it still hasn't happened. They're trying to create some sort of a compromise, but they have yet to meet and actually discuss.
And what do you expect regarding that? Do you think that the president will be able to bring the parties to a deal in the end, relating to the judicial changes and everything?
I'm an optimist.
That's a good thing.
So I think so, because hopefully, and I had a long conversation about this on Saturday, that I feel like there is a very, the silent majority has just been very quiet, because if anyone who says something, there's many people who are violent on both sides, will try and shut you up or turn it against you and bring, so people just feel like, I don't want to write about this on social media. I don't want my neighbor to start, I don't know, cursing me or trying to, so I feel like there's a silent majority that's been very nervous about the future of the state of Israel. People are talking about this being like the third temple being destroyed, and the second temple was destroyed 2,000 years ago because of hate, of hating each other for no reason. In Hebrew, it's called sinat chinam. It's the hate of someone without any, purpose or reason, just, and it's very difficult times because, as you could see on the right, there's a this week there was a group of pilots who said we're not coming to reserve duty, and in Israel, reserve duty is something that's very important for our army, and I think a majority of a group of a specific base said we're not coming because of the situation. And that's a big deal because, Israel's security is number one, priority. And when people who are, at the front, that's a problem. There's an issue of like high-tech companies. Many people who are running high-tech companies are more on the liberal side. And they tried to have like a protest of these high-tech firms, or tech firms. And it was, on the one hand, it was starting to be successful. But then on the other hand, there was people who were like, wait, why? And they were like, you could take a day off and go demonstrate. And people are like, wait, but if I'm supporting the reform, many people felt that they were forced to go to these, demonstrations. So again, everyone's put in a very kind of not easy situation. My brother-in-law was just telling me he works in a firm, a law firm in Tel Aviv, and he just shuts up because he supports the reform, but he just doesn't want to speak about it because everyone's against it. So he's not saying anything. And there are people on the other side who are in situations where, they feel like a minority. So it's a very difficult situation. A funny kind of twist to the story is El Al was having difficulty finding pilots to fly Prime Minister Netanyahu to Rome tomorrow. And then the Prime Minister's office was like, okay, we'll have a different kind of what's it called, a tender, and they changed the requirements to a smaller airplane, so other airlines like Arkia, which is a small Israeli airline, could put in an offer. And then El Al was so taken back, so El Al gave like a really low price of like 20,000 shekel or something, and said, which is like, they're losing a lot of money because 20,000 shekel is nothing for a whole airplane to fly to Rome, because they didn't want to, they suddenly found a pilot and it was okay. So it's a smaller airplane, and the government barely had to pay anything for it. But that's kind of where we're at the moment, where it's very, everything's very diverse and very violent. And many people, I just heard someone on TV who was a veteran who was saying, I'm afraid that in the near future, the state of Israel just will cease to exist. And people are saying these sentences, which is a difficult, thing to say. We're just before our 75th, Independence Day. So that's not an easy thing to say or to hear. So that's kind of pretty much it. I'm happy to open up for questions or remarks.
Yeah, there are also a lot of fears, especially in diaspora. I often hear that people are afraid that Israel will fall into like a civil war. Do you think that's a realistic scenario?
Again, people are talking about it, and I said I'm an optimist, so I hope not. Someone was, you can't like sit around a table without these topics to come up, and someone was like, a different brother-in-law of mine, we had, I had lots of holiday time with my family on Purim. He said, you know what? I think Iran just needs to like attack us.
Okay, yeah, well, that's
he's like that's gonna save us from within, because unfortunately we're very good at being together in times of need, but not as much, but you're not like off the charts with, like, it's definitely something that people are talking about. It's a real concern.
Yeah. And I have a question from a viewer. Are there any issues the parties in the coalition don't have a common opinion on? Like what might be a possible issue to break up the coalition?
So for instance, there was that issue of the Kotel where it was like, one party wanted to promote it. I think also like LGBT rights is something that some of the parties, like the religious Zionist party would want to promote more, but Likud won't let that happen. The Speaker of the Knesset is Amir Ohana, who is a very outwardly gay person who has who's married to a man they have children together. I think that was a statement of Prime Minister Netanyahu to kind of, show to the world, that we're not just becoming Iran or something. And it was interesting. So when he was actually sworn in, there was a Knesset member from an ultra-Orthodox party who was like making faces, like he felt like uncomfortable with the situation because, it's not something that's acceptable according to, the community that he comes from. So that could definitely be an issue. And the judicial reform, again, it's pretty much, supported by the partners. But again, every party has certain things that are more important to it. So the Haredi parties, this is important to them, but there are other things that they would maybe prefer to promote.
Yeah. And maybe it's a bit of an off-topic question because we didn't discuss it really yet, but what is the chance that the newly proposed capital punishment law will pass?
The capital punishment?
Yeah, the capital punishment law, they proposed like a new law for that. What do you think is the chance that this law will pass?
I don't think it would pass. I don't think it would pass. And I think there's so many things that are controversial that they want to pass. I don't think this will be one of them that they would kind of give everything, to do, put all their, their coins on this one. I don't think that would be it. And definitely there's been a lot of criticism, mainly outside of Israel, I think, about this situation. So I don't see it at the moment becoming something that's actually passed. But again, as I mentioned, there's lots of noise. So every other day, there's like another, issue coming up, and people are like losing, control and understanding of what's actually going on.
Yeah. And how are all these difficult situations related to pressure and anti-Semitism from the outside world, like BDS and organizations like that? I
think less BDS and anti-Semitism, but I think that at the end of the day, the fact that so many Jewish leaders from outside of Israel are pressuring the government and Israeli society about the judicial reform and about the law of return and other issues, it's slowly sinking in. Like, you can't ignore these, statements by American Jews who are supporting you in front of the American government, who are telling the American government veto a vote against Israel in the UN. So it's definitely a complicated situation. Again, there is a fear that that the boycott of Israel will become less fringe and more mainstream if Israel passes certain the judicial reform, for instance. There's a financial threat also from different rating companies around the world saying they're going to lower the rating, the credit ratings, and there's the issue of the way international countries see Israel, whether that democracy or not. So that's a big issue. And also, the term BDS has been used, I think, abused a little bit too much. Those, for instance, Many people in the government have been saying that Yair Lapid, who is the chairman of the opposition, who has been speaking very negatively about the reform and saying Israel won't be a democracy if this goes through, saying he is himself actually a BDS activist or promoting BDS for saying these types of things. So it's kind of, it's been used a lot. I think so. We're less concerned about the extremes, but there is a certain fright that will become more mainstream, and that's definitely something that could make a difference and change things.
Yeah. And someone here wants to know if there is a real possibility that the president will veto a law that is approved with minimal votes in favor.
I don't see that happening at the moment, because President Herzog is very much kind of, some people would say he's very parv, we would say in Hebrew or Jewish, which is like not here and not there. He's kind of in the middle, because he's trying to be, he's trying for all the sides to like him and support him. I don't see that happening at the moment.
Okay. So from what I see here, we don't have any more open questions. So I think you gave us a pretty clear lecture. If there are not many questions, it means you did a good job explaining everything. So that's a compliment.
Someone raised their hand though.
There is one after all. He says, when reading the comments to the articles in the Jerusalem Post app, I read a lot of comments written with a background of right-wing hate against the left. Who are actually the readers? That's what he wants to know.
Of the Jerusalem Post?
I suppose, yeah.
Okay. So the Jerusalem Post,
yes, Jerusalem Post.
So interestingly, the Jerusalem Post, a large, I would say maybe 60% of the readership is in the US. So in a very small percentage actually from Israel. So you have a big percentage of people from Europe, Australia, South Africa, etc., and around the world, and just a few, I'd say like 5% are actually from Israel. The large majority of our readers are in the US. So whether American Jews or people, it could be also Christians who are, very pro-Israel, evangelicals, and just people who are interested, in what's going on in Israel. Yeah. But I think a majority of our readers are Jews outside of Israel.
Okay, yeah, that's clear. And I see that somebody raised his hand. Franklin raised his hand, but if I allow you to, then, you can be a host, and that's not the idea of the lecture. So please type your question in the VNA question box below. We also have another question. The question says, what are the options now? Do you see a way out of this dead-end street with this government? Are there any MKs that could topple this one?
Right. So first of all, there are MKs in the Likud who are very silent, who are against the way that the reforms are promoted, and maybe against certain parts of the reform, so they can, technically do something. There were two members of the Likud who just, I think yesterday or maybe 2 days ago, Yuli Edelstein, who was the Speaker of the Knesset a few years ago, who is now chairman of the committee, and Dani Danon, who was our ambassador to the UN, who didn't receive any, portfolio from Netanyahu, who joined with two members of Benny Gantz's party, the National Union. Oh, what's her name? I can't even remember anymore. Used to be Blue and White Party. They joined together and said, we have to speak reasonably. We have to create dialogue, which was pretty brave on their behalf. But on the other hand, like Netanyahu, they're not Netanyahu supporters, so it kind of made sense. But people inside the Likud could definitely make a difference there. I feel like hopefully very soon, there will be some sort of a dialogue and discussions.
Okay. Okay, well, I have two new questions, and those are the lasts. How many members of parliament are still in favor of a two-state solution? And is there any contact with pro-peace Palestinians about this issue?
So for many years, this two-state solution is kind of like an archived topic. Like it's not something on the table. I mean, even like even the center parties are not promoting this in a very like physical way. So it's not anywhere near. And how many would support it? Definitely less than 60. But I mean, it's an interesting question actually. We should survey them and see. But like I would say maybe like a few tens of Knesset members out of 120.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess also looking at the time, we came at the end of this session. Zvika, thank you very much for being with us. It was really great having you here, explaining a lot to us about what's going on in Israel, about what we can expect. So we hope to see you again in the future. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody else for taking the time to come and listen to us. And hopefully you'll be there next time too. So I wish you all a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.